Mark, I think it's be a good point to really establish for people what we're talking about here, and that is largely melanoma. Would you be able to really paint us a picture of what melanoma is and how it affects people?
Absolutely. So melanoma is one of the most common cancers nowadays, particularly in the sort of group of people who are tuned in watching us today. So the younger population, middle-aged population, melanoma has become one of the commoner cancers, and not many people realize that. And it's a skin cancer, and it's a cancer that arises in the pigment-forming cells, which are predominantly found in the skin. Interestingly, those cells are also found in other parts of the body, so actually melanomas can arise from sites other than the skin. But for most people, the first sign of a melanoma is, as Danny's just said, a pigmented lesion, a change in a mole on the skin. And I think the important point here is that caught early, melanoma has an absolutely excellent outlook for the majority of people. There are a few unlucky people where there can be trouble, but if it's caught early, then it's a very curable cancer for the vast majority of people. So hence what we're trying to do is get this message across. This is a common cancer. It's going to affect people that you know, but if caught early, the outlooks are excellent. And there's no shame in spotting a lesion on your skin and saying, well, look, you know what, I'm actually going to do something about that. I'm not going to put my head in the sand. I'm going to seek medical advice. I'm going to see my GP, say, look, this mole's changed. This wasn't here before. You know, what do you think? Get it checked out. That's the message. So it's a type of skin cancer, caught early, excellent outlook. And if it spreads, still the outlook can be good, but it's just more uncertain.
Okay. We're going to talk a lot about prevention. But let's talk a little bit about cause first. You know, what are the lifestyle elements that contribute to people getting a melanoma?
So for melanoma that arises in the skin, particularly in fair-skinned people, the commonest cause by far and away is sun exposure. And that goes for all skin cancers, and melanoma's no exception there. So excessive sun exposure in fair-skinned populations leads to a huge increase in the number of people who get melanoma. And you see this in Australia, you see this in South Africa, you see this in Florida, where people with fair skins live. They get a lot of sun exposure, and the rates of skin cancer in those climates have just gone absolutely rocketing. But over the last 20 and 30 years in this country, we're starting to see more and more skin cancers as people spend more time with their hobbies, with their pursuits in the sun, like fishing or going on summer holidays. So it's sun exposure. And we think it's sun exposure, particularly for melanoma, we think it's sun exposure in early life that's important. So the message is not going only out to those adults who are watching, but also for those of you with children. It's all about sun exposure in early life that predispose, particularly burning sun exposure. So sunburns, you know, intensive exposure, for example, to things like sunbeds. We think those predispose people to get melanoma in later life. So that's the cause.
When you say early years, what do you mean?
Well, I don't think you can be too early on this with our children. I think we need to be really careful almost as soon as they start playing outside. Now, there's a balance to be had, like many things in life, because we do want to encourage our children to be outside. We want them to get a certain amount of ultraviolet light exposure, for vitamin D exposure, and all of the good things that come from being outside. But what we must try and prevent our children doing is getting sunburnt. That's the key message. And also that they don't need to, as they become teenagers, they don't need to get a suntan through sun exposure. You know, if they really want to look a different color, there's all sorts of other techniques, aren't there? Artificial tanning, etc. So avoiding sunburns and avoiding excessive sun exposure from the earliest you can go.
So not effectively go on holiday, enjoy it, but not sunbathing, not sun worshipping, laying out in it for 10 hours a day for 2 weeks. Because when I was young, that was the thing. Your holiday was judged on how brown you were when you came home. Did you have a brilliant holiday? Yes. Look how brown I am.
Absolutely, and I was part of that generation. Don't get me wrong. You know, I'm practicing, you know, what I preach now. But you know, when I was 17, 18, going backpacking around the Greek islands, I remember going into restaurants, getting olive oil from the table, putting olive oil on my skin, and basically cooking myself like a fried chicken. You know,
Amazing.
So you know,
I'll tell you what, Mark, it's not done too bad because you've barely got a wrinkle.
I think
he's only 27 though.
I think that's the second thing to say about what are the risk factors, and then you have to there's genetics as well. So obviously our skin type is genetically determine the color of our skin, and I think there's a certain amount of genetics in this as well, to do with aging and sun exposure.
Is there genetics beneath simply just the skin color and the depth of the color?
Yeah, there is a little bit, but I don't want to overcomplicate it, because actually a genetic predisposition to melanoma, although it does exist, is incredibly rare. There are a few families who do have that. The vast majority of us, it's the skin type we have, the fair skin populations being more likely to get skin cancers than the darker skin populations. Not exclusively, by the way, but as a general rule.